California Governor Gavin Newsom is splitting from his own party tonight on the issue of transgender athletes in women's sports. On the first episode of his new podcast, Governor Newsom, who is potentially considering a run for the White House in 2028, judge for yourself when you hear this, spoke about this issue with the conservative activist Charlie Kirk. And Governor Newsom said Republicans were able to effectively weaponize this issue against his party.
Would you say no men in female sports?
Well, I think it's an issue of fairness. I completely agree with you on that. It is an issue of fairness. So I revere sports. And so the issue of fairness is completely legit. And I saw that the last couple of years. Boy, did I saw how you guys were able to weaponize that issue at another level.
My Democratic sources are David Axelrod and Karen Finney. I believe at that part, Charlie Kirk was saying they weren't weaponizing it, they were just highlighting it. What did you make of what Governor Newsom had to say?
Well, I think I made of it what most people will make of it, which is he read the he pretty much said it. He was impressed by how they weaponized the issue. Here's my advice. If I were giving the governor advice, I'd say, don't be so overt that people can see the wheels turning. The obvious question would be, well, you've been governor of California for 6 years. You were lieutenant governor for many years before that. When did you have this epiphany? Right. And the answer is when he found that the Republicans could weaponize the issue.
The thing that bothered me about the whole incident was it was such an obvious gimmick, right? He needed some headlines to say, Newsom breaks with the left, right? And what does he do? He picks of all the people that you could pick to try to say, hey, I want to talk to somebody who's coming from a different perspective than me. It was such a gimmick. And to David's point, it's like the thirstiness is dripping off of him. And it's like, just stop it. It's gross. And, he's using the left, basically. And these are the people who have had his back for a very long time. When they tried to recall him, actually. And I just don't think people are not going to take too kindly to it. On the issue, what bothers me about it, I did college sports. I don't think I would have felt it was fair if a trans person I rode crew. I'm clear about that. But I would never, I think the conversation that he could have been having is, you don't have to demonize people. You have to demonize children who are trans and who are vulnerable and have high suicide rates, right? Instead of sort of gushing at Charlie Kirk about, you weaponize it. Why not take a stand?
So you're bothered by how he did it, not necessarily his argument?
Sure. I also just think it was so obvious. It was just disgusting, the whole thing, honestly.
Well, and what he said was that he believed the most devastating ad against Vice President Harris during the 2024 race was an ad that the Trump campaign ran about, it was her from the 2020 primary, where she was essentially saying...
I'm not even sure it was a 2020 primary. I think it may have been her from a race for state office.
Okay, so it was maybe
earlier,
even earlier than that, but it was her on camera in an interview saying that she did believe that gender-affirming surgeries should be able to happen to illegal immigrants or people who are in prison.
No, it was her saying that she fought hard to allow prisoners
in prison,
the state prison to get this surgery, and that was one of the angles. There was a taxpayer surgery.
And he said the fact that she didn't respond to that ad, he believed was, quote, devastating.
Yeah, well, I think that ad was devastating. That ad, she worked very hard to build her story of middle-class roots and middle-class upbringing, sort of mainstream kind of thinking. And that ad it separated her from some of the people that she was trying to reach. But listen, for Democrats, those kind of debates are not useful. When Democrats are arguing about economic issues and things that affect the broadest number of people, they do better than on these cultural issues. And that's been true for a very long time.
I agree with that. But, David, I think one of the mistakes our party makes, and part of the reason that ad was so effective, $60 million from Elon Musk spent in Pennsylvania doesn't hurt. But they didn't have an answer for it. And I think, too...
No, they're not responding. He was right about that.
Yeah.
Look, as a political analyst, he was right about everything that he said as a political analyst.
Should
hold on.
that not be said for someone as prominent as him, given this issue, obviously, he believed was formidable?
But I think there's a different issue, I'm sorry,
Yes.
for Democrats, which is too often we're told, just don't respond. And neuroscience, actually, if you don't respond, then people are left to fill in the gaps on their own. And so he wasn't wrong on that point. But again, why are you sitting with Charlie Kirk taking pot shots at the VP? Again, you've been the governor of the state, the lieutenant governor, the mayor. Why don't you talk about yourself? Talk about your own accomplishments rather than sitting there playing political strategist.
Well, I think
with
you
Charlie
answered your own
Kirk.
question earlier. I think that
Thirsty.
he did it for purposes of staking out that
Of
territory on that issue. And let's be honest, this isn't a new tactic. We all remember sort of the word triangulation from the 90s.
Did you come up with that one?
No, I was not. I was not. I did not.
I'm
I did
teasing.
not.
I know you
But so it's clear what he was doing. He just didn't do it very artfully. But yes, Caitlin, the issue. I agree with both of you. That is, it was an issue that took on outsized importance, and I agree with you that she never responded to it. And they spent the Trump campaign spent about a quarter of its resources on a series of ads on that one issue, using her in her own words,
Yeah.
and it was very, very damning.
Well, and I just asked because he may have 2028 ambitions. Obviously, that's part of why he's doing the podcast, to sit down with these more MAGA-aligned voices about this. But Seth Moulton of Massachusetts made similar comments and was ripped by a lot of Democrats for what he said and his view on this, even though he thought it was just, he said, as a Democrat, I'm, quote, supposed to be afraid to say that.
Well, look, I think what I didn't like about what Seth Moulton said was, I think one of the things that Democrats don't always learn is stand up for your values. I mean, I will stand up for the value of people's right if you are trans, if you are LGBTQ, and not demonizing people, even if I disagree with you, as we were talking about, on the issue of should you be able to play sports. And I think people will respect it. I think too often what Democrats do is say, we're just not going to talk about it.
But didn't Seth Moulton say exactly what you said, which is that it's not fair to women if there are trans athletes who
Sure.
have an advantage?
But then he went
He
on
said,
to
quote,
say,
I have two little girls. I don't want them getting run over on a playing field by a male or formerly male athlete.
But he went on to say, as a Democrat, I'm supposed to be afraid to say that. No, you don't have to be afraid to say that. Stop that nonsense. Say how you feel.
Well,
be honest. Be intellectually honest.
As Caitlin points out, he took a lot of stuff for it.
Because he didn't say it in the context of trying to say, look, this is how I feel on the issue. He was trying to give an explanation about why we may have lost the election. And it was far more complicated, I think, than he was making it out to be in that comment. I know you disagree with me on that.
No,
but
no,
I think
no.
I just think-
Listen, I think the Democratic Party needs to get back to fundamentals. In my view, I mean, I've said this many times, Democratic Party has to stop approaching working people like missionaries and anthropologists with the message, we're here to help you become more like us.
But here's the thing that so many in our party miss when they say that working people, 45% of working people are black and brown. We're not going to get back white, non-college educated men thinking that we're going with one message instead of
the biggest loss
with a different
the
message.
biggest loss Democrats faced were among Hispanics.
That's right.
They
You know why? 'Cause
they
we
lost
haven't talked
black
to them
working
in
class
3
people.
years.
A lot of great things to talk about.
Yes.
And luckily we have 2 to 4 years to do so. David Axelrod,
Absolutely.
Karen Finney, thank you so much.